Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I tossed out an invite on TikTok looking for people who would resonate with this kind of conversation, and I immediately assumed that it would be you because of your recent content. I actually wasn't following your content until just a couple of weeks ago, and I've really enjoyed your focus on the recognition that you are not what you think you are.
Yeah, it's been a recent sort of click for me, and it was for a week. It's kind of like settled down recently, but there was a week there that it was absolutely blowing my mind. And I've been sort of got into reading about, spirituality, meditation, related things a few years ago. And I was talking about it, even has had this account and been posting content for a year related to it, almost like tiptoeing around it. And it wasn't until about a month ago, around the time I actually had a friend send me one of your videos. Right. That's when I started following you. And he was like, this sounds a lot like what you've been talking about recently. And I was like, oh my God. And then I started scrolling through your page and I was like, wow, all right. That's
That's
awesome. And now we're
awesome.
talking on Zoom like a couple of weeks later. It's wild. So,
Right? Absolutely. And it's interesting because we're on completely different sides of the continent. We come from completely different stories. And yet, for some reason, your state of mind required input in a way that necessitated me, and vice versa. Because admittedly, I watch your content and it's inspiring because I'm not a young person anymore. Like I'm in my 40s now. I woke up when I was just a little over 20. So I've been slugging it out for 20 years, talking to people and watching it fall on deaf ears, largely not just deaf ears, but hostile and angry ears. And now in the last 5 years, especially, I'm noticing that the conversation is becoming more commonplace, not because anybody is encouraging it, but because people are coming to it on their own
mhm,
in the same way that you did.
definitely.
All of a sudden it just clicks. And it's funny that
Yeah.
you said, for a month it was just like bam, it was there. And then for a week it was even more intense. And then it kind of dies off and you get to apply all of those insights,
Mhm,
or at least try to. And then all of a sudden, as you're starting to get your stride back, you get hit with another week of intense insights. There's
mhm,
so many times in my life where I've went, now I'm getting it, only to
mhm.
have that exact same moment a year later. It's like, right, I've been here before. It's always just getting it now. You're never achieving a state of clarity. You're either
Mhm.
in it or you're not.
Hmm. Yeah, and and because a lot of people ask, how do you get there? And my response is, you're there, you don't know it, and it's an interesting thing because it's almost I've had to kind of rework some of the ways that I communicate things, and I'm trying to balance between because even just thinking about myself, like I've been posting about these types of things, and it still didn't click for me. So if it took that long after reading specific things and feeling like I kind of knew what was going on, like, oh yeah, the present moment's the only thing we have, but it still didn't. So it's like if I was that close and still didn't click, then there's probably most people out there like aren't even to a point maybe that it would be able to resonate. And some, I'll make one video that kind of hits and then one video that doesn't. Cause I think I found at least just content creator to content creator, like early on, being able to resonate in a way with people and like match it to something they experience and
Mhm.
then kind of move from there can help. But the past month, my goal out there, as you've probably seen with my videos, is to get this through to people in
It's been
as many
awesome.
different creative ways that I can.
Absolutely. It's been awesome to watch. I really enjoyed your video on taking offense, because this is a
Mhm.
point that I've made many times because I had to take it in myself. I had to come to the point where it's like, right, yeah, I can get triggered because of my past. I can get triggered because of my narrative. I can hold this against the person, but they don't know any of that stuff. They just said something that they thought was the right thing to say based on what they understand. They don't know my story. They don't know my triggers, right? And so I really had to take responsibility for the fact that I was holding something against strangers that they had no way of dealing with,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah,
eventually it's like, right,
exactly.
I'm just going to let it go. And that's a
Mhm.
process in itself. But it's interesting that you say that a lot of people aren't at the point where they can see that yet. And it's because we don't realize that there's something to see. I went through years of exploring, Buddhism and Taoism and Sufism and all this other stuff. And it's like you're reading about concepts, but not getting the truth because you're still translating it through how you see yourself. So you're like, oh, that makes me feel good. Oh, I don't like that. That doesn't make me feel good. But it's always in relation to how you fit into the world until you realize, oh, it's just about me.
Yeah,
That's it.
and Exactly. And you mentioned all of those, like the pointers and, the representations of the truth. And I listen to a lot of Alan Watts. I'm a big fan of his. And he talks about the ideas that like, the word tree is not a tree, a picture of an experience is not the experience. And yet that's sort of how, I don't know if we've begun to live more that way, or it's kind of been the same like that forever, but it's this idea that everything is a pointer to the truth. And so if you're able to find someone that's able to, like a quote unquote spiritual teacher that's able to resonate with you, it doesn't mean it's going to resonate with everyone. And it's about finding the people that you're able to resonate that can communicate that in different ways. So there is no, like perfect, ideal person, even though a lot of, that's what kind of religions are based off of, I guess, for the most
attachment,
part. But
right, it's the attachment to one teacher, and that's easy when you feel lost and afraid. You want to find somebody who seems to know what they're doing, and you want to follow them because it's just easier to do that. And one of the reasons I really like Krishnamurti was that when they wanted to announce he was the world teacher, the reincarnation of Buddha, that he had hundreds of thousands of people ready to follow him. And he went up and he said, well, as my first act as the leader of the Order of the Star, I'm disbanding the Order of the Star. You don't need a messiah. You need to be responsible. And that was it. He gave up the chance to be a spiritual leader, as it were, because he recognized that that was the problem. Mm-hmm. Right? It's you're not going to get it until you take responsibility. You're not going to get it until you're willing to fall on your own and pick yourself up. And our culture is all about the avoidance of that. It's about, no, we got this. Don't worry. We'll protect you from that. We'll protect you from this. Don't worry. You're insured against that. The road signs are obviously in your favor, and so on and so forth. And so you get this sense of control that never brings you back to that state of humility, where you recognize, oh, all I've got is here. All I've got is influence. And if I'm carrying an illusion, I don't even have that.
Mm-hmm. Like taking responsibility for everything that happens to you in your life. And it's like this reliance on outside sources to show you the way. And it's like using that as a crutch and it's easier. And I think that's why, things like Catholicism, Christianity, all of these religions are so prevalent, that it's human nature to want to rely on things like that and feel the sense of safety and security. And I've actually been dealing with that a little bit with myself. Like I'm on the brink of, I really enjoy creating content. I still have a full-time job, and it's almost like I like the security of that, knowing that every 2 weeks I'm going to continue getting money in, and I still am able to do all this stuff. I make time for all this stuff because it's what I really enjoy. So it's never felt like work ever creating a video. And it's like, when I hit 500,000 followers, a lot of people are like, wow, that's amazing. Like, you've done so much work, put so much time in. Like, how much work a week do you do for this? And those ideas, like, they never even cross my mind. How many hours do I put into this? Like, I don't know. I film a video here, film a video there. Like, it's never ever felt difficult. And even, creating a podcast, whatever, all of those things, like, it's been very easy. So going back, like, I feel like I'm sort of at a point, I'm close to just shifting. And, but part of me is like, I want to know that I can start making enough money that I feel safe. And then instead of just making the jump. So I'm at a point in my life right now where I feel this sort of transitional, build up, and I just have to do it at some point. But honestly, like, it's something I've been struggling with a little bit recently.
Yep. Well, and there's no way to get that sense of certainty. We can convince ourselves that we have that sense of certainty. We can look at the past and go, oh, well, looking at my performance in the past, that means this might happen. We can look at all of the considerations for the future that we're aware of, and we can try and take a guess, but we don't know. It's just about making a decision and rolling with the result. And that comes down to faith in yourself, right? But occasionally it requires us to face the idea of giving up all of our comfort in order to have radical change. And that's always a tricky decision. It's one that you can't screw up unless you avoid it.
Exactly.
Right. You can put it off for a while.
Like most things. any fear, really.
That's it, right? But once you jump in, I mean, everything can go backwards, and you will still come out the other end at some point, and you'll do it again. You'll try it again, because we always get to that point if we are aware of our comforts, or if we're aware of our restrictions, of the limitations we're holding on to ourselves. There was somebody I spoke to a couple of weeks ago. She made a TikTok video, and she was crying. And I hate those videos because immediately it's like, right, I've been there. I don't like that. So I reached out, and it was very much, I know what I have to do, but I'm afraid of who I'll be if I'm not thinking about who I am right now. And it's like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly the point, right? But the less you think about who you are while you go through that leap, the easier the landing is.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. And it's like, I've been talking, I guess, a lot about that recently, just the understanding that it's all we have, truly, like all there ever is and all we ever are is this exact moment. And it's not that like we exist within, or we do exist within the moment, which is us. Everything exists within it. It's not, the ticker on the clock. It's that which the clock exists within, almost. And it's been interesting because I feel like that's just where all of my, at least, anxiety and worry comes from. I mean, that's kind of the definition, is just
Time.
where I'll be. Yeah.
Yeah. Time, control, identity, it's all the same illusion. It's all the same
Mm-hmm.
illusion of division, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the conceptual world as opposed to the real world, which is kind of a funny statement, because when you really look at the real world, that doesn't really mean anything, because you can say, well, I'm in the universe, but I'm only aware of the universe from the inside of my awareness. So I'm really not in or out of anything. There is no internal or external. It just is, right? And that's where I always have fun with conversations, particularly with spiritual people and religious people, because we so desperately want to give it a name. We so desperately want to conceptualize it, its source, or it's Christ consciousness, or it's God. And it's like, well, those are all wonderful words that really don't mean anything unless you've had the recognition that drove the creation of those words to begin with, right? Like in Catholicism, it's Yahweh. The name of God is Yahweh. Well, it took me years to realize that means ineffable. Literally, it means you can't say what the name is. It's like, well, you could have just said that to begin with. That we can't actually give it a name. Why am I calling it God, right? It's the Tao that can't be told. It's like, we could have these conversations earlier than university. We could start talking with kids about this in like high school, where it's important.
Yeah. Do you think with the ineffable, do you think it's something like, and I was actually talking to one of my friends about this, because I was looking for apartments last week in New York, and I was staying on his couch, and he had a bunch of questions, but he was my old roommate. And he had a bunch of questions just about what I had been posting about recently. And we went back and forth a lot. And I love when people ask me questions about this stuff, because I don't have all the answers to every question. I was like, honestly, great question. I don't know. And he's very, very cerebral. And we got to a point that, like, why is everything, like, why is the universe happening? Why are we here, et cetera? And like, my response was, I don't know, but it seems like just to experience form, but I don't know. And I think it may be that we are, existing in like 3-dimensional forms, existing in a 4-dimensional universe. And in order to understand what's, beyond that, it's like we're almost not in a dimension where we can even comprehend why. And there's no amount of words or ideas that we can express. There's no way to express it, and like the essence of it and why. And that's kind of how the conversation ended. And it was like 1 a.m. by that point. So we were like both real tired. But yeah, it's very interesting. And I don't get in too deep into that too often, because it's kind of like, where do you even go? Like,
well, that's it. It doesn't go anywhere. And some people will avoid the conversation for that point. But I always say that recognition is its own point. Every time we have a moment where we have that insight that's just a layer deeper, we have changed. Our perspective on everything has changed, even if it's just by a little bit. And that changes our experience going forward. So the conversations may not ever get to a point where it's like, yes, everything's one now because we've talked it to that point. But every time we have that recognition that we've invested in another illusion, that we're still committing to something that's not real, or that just makes us comfortable, it changes the field of play. It changes how we perceive everything. And that gets closer to the next insight, right? So those conversations are a lot of fun. What really frustrated me when I started having those conversations is that there is no why, right? You'll notice in my old videos from 2005, I was saying, like, we chose to come here to avoid the responsibility of being unity. We chose to come here for experience. And the problem was, back in 2005, I think I was 24 4 or something. And I was still looking at it from the perspective of me, from what I would do as a human being, from my body, from my choice. It's not, there is no why so much as existence is. If there was no existence, there would be nothing. So existence always is. It's always existence, because otherwise, what are we talking about? But in existence, there's no duality. Existence is just what is. But everything that could exist within what is, and because what is limitless, there's no definitions, there's no borders, there's nothing. It's just what is. Everything in duality between one side and the other is potentially possible in what is. And we all experience the potential. We experience the potential of being, and we feel it is real, because of course the imagination of reality is reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So is that you think what we're doing here is just all of the potential permutations is basically what we're doing?
That's the
right
entirety
now?
of time and space. Everywhere in the universe is every possible story that could exist, from the microscopic to the macroscopic, right? From DNA onward to large lumbering giants in some far off universe. Everything we can imagine must and can exist somewhere at some time within what is. And that's why the universe is so big, is because there's so many things. And then this is just one timeline. But if we look at eternity, eternity is a timeline that never ends. So even our 16.4 billion years that we think this universe is, has gone and been and gone and been numerous times, because it's eternity, right? So every variation of what we're existing in exists within now, exists within time, and it's all now, all the time. Every time there's an aware person, or every time there's an observer, that's the universe coming down to a single point of experience. And that's what we are. It's crazy, right? And that's where if somebody says, well, do we have free will? It's like, you absolutely have free will. That's the point. This is our free will. The world we've created right now is the accumulation of our free will over time. And we've been investing in illusions, which is why this is where we are.
So it's almost like with the illusion aspect of it, like we sort of created the illusion to experience it.
Yep, absolutely. In order to find our way past it. And it's the same with, so Jane Lovinger in the 50s, she was a developmental psychologist. She came up with the stages of ego development. And I didn't know this when I made those videos back in 2005, because I wasn't a parent at that point. But it's true. We go through the phase of being unity. We come into the world, we still think we're one, which is why when our parents leave the room, we assume they stop existing. We don't see a separation between us and reality, right? We don't understand, oh, there's the perception of division here. And so we start to learn that. And then as we start to learn that, we start to learn concepts to describe the division. And we get so lost in that by the time we're 10 years old that we forget we used to see everything as one. And so then we have to go through all of that feeling of being lost and confused and gain some context, some understanding of the environment we're in. And if we do it and we pay close enough attention, we can come back to the recognition that we're one before we die, because there's no choice. We're eventually going back to the recognition that we're one way or another, whether it's alive or dead. But we can do it here. Absolutely. And that's what every spiritual teacher throughout our history that we hold up in esteem has ever been saying, is that you can do it too.
So with this return, so up until 10, I've dabbled a little bit in, subconscious understanding and brainwave states and theta and whatnot. And it seems like going through up until around 10, we're mostly in theta. Is that sort of the transitional process from believing we're one to believing we're separate almost? And then by the time we hit that age, it's kind of solidified in there. And then we have the subconscious, we have the internal dialogue, we have
the concept of division. Right. And so now we're experiencing our projection of that division. We're experiencing all of our ideas of that division, which is why our brain slows down. Concepts are like the weirdest and slowest way to think. When we're really processing, we're not talking to ourselves at all. Right? You can feel your brain just kicking, and it's not about you going, oh, maybe this, and oh, maybe this. It's just feeding through the information. We're not in the way whatsoever. And that's what we have to work through. My daughter's 14 right now. And so in the last year, I have definitely seen her suddenly becoming more aware of her internal dialogue, of the dialogue that has accumulated over time without her even noticing it, because she got familiar with concepts, because she started living in this world of ideas and labels and language. Eventually, we forget that that was something we learned. We actually think we were born with concepts. This is why it always bothers me when people say, oh, well, greed is human nature. It's like, no. That's something we learned as a result of the illusion that we invested in. Greed is a result of division. It's not human nature. We just say that so we can keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, more for me and whatnot. And so, because I have been talking to some of my friends, they've been curious about these types of things. And when I was out with some last weekend, we got into an expressive conversation about this idea that I was basically telling my friend Daniel that he's not actually Daniel. And he was like, "What are you talking about?" "Yes, I am. I'm Daniel right here. Like, this is it. I can't become you." And this idea that like I'm not the human I've been conditioned to believe that I am, but yet people say like I'm stuck in this body, or I'm confined to this body, or I can't just become something else magically. And I was like, I had some responses, but I couldn't quite, this idea that, we're not the human.
Mm.
We've been conditioned, like we're more so the awareness of them and their environment equally, more or less. And so it was kind of tough for me to respond to like, you can't leave your body. And it's not that I understand that like the awareness doesn't exist within the body more so exists within the awareness, but it's still like, how do you
get that across?
Yeah.
No, I understand for sure. And it's tricky because somebody's ability to recognize what you're saying is always going to be limited by who they think they are. So as soon as they're invested in the idea that what I think I am is the truth, they can't see what you're saying, because you're talking about awareness without self-definition. You're talking about just the simple property of I exist. And most people don't see things that simplistically. They still think, well, no, I went through school and this is the job I have, and this is my family name, and this is my history, and this is the narrative. That's who I am. And that's why they're afraid of death, ultimately, is because they think the end of the narrative is the end of them. And anybody who realizes they're not their narrative stops fearing death, right? It's like the Gospel of Thomas. Jesus says, whoever gets this will never taste death. And that's all he was saying. Is like, if you understand what I'm saying, you never have anything to worry about at all, right? But then people who look at them as what they think they are, they will go, oh, that means I'm going to carry on in eternal life, this character, this story, my preferences, my opinions. It's like, that's not what he's saying. That's not it, right? So we're having a conversation with somebody who's talking to you as an idea, and you're talking to them about reality. So it's like, well, why am I stuck in this body? It's like, what do you mean by me? What do you mean by why am I stuck in this body? Because if you're saying awareness, you're not. You're in all bodies all the time. But whether you're talking about what you're aware of right now, that really comes down to what you're willing to limit yourself to. Because you can sit in a state of awareness or meditation or psychedelic bliss, whatever you'd like to say it, and literally experience all kinds of different lives. I mean, Buddha did that. He closed his eyes for a second and said, I just experienced 1,000 lives. And that was the point, is that they're all within our awareness. You don't have to leave your body. You're not in your body, right? The body is just a perception. It's an experience. I'm not even convinced everything's physical, honestly, because it's not. When we look deeply enough at it, it's just vibrating goop. It's just energy moving around. And that's no different than how I would perceive it in a completely lucid dream. I would perceive it as an extension of myself. So we get really caught up in this idea, like I'm stuck in my body. It's like, no, that's just an experience. As soon as you close your eyes, as soon as you go to sleep, that's no longer true. Right? So who are you if you're not your body? And it's just, you're just aware. That's it. And that's hard to get across.
It is. Yeah. Because another comeback that I get is, well, I can, move this body. And if someone hits me, I feel pain, and I can, have an internal dialogue. Like I can hear the thoughts inside of Andrew's head, but you can't.
So I always like bringing it back to the body in this way. Every cell in your body, every organ has its own individual purpose, its own individual experience. Yet we don't walk around introducing ourselves as a billion cells. We introduce ourselves as me, right? So the perspective of separation doesn't mean separation exists. It just means that it's a perception of separation. Like if I'm influencing everybody I talk to and they're all influencing me, where's the dividing line? Right? I could say, oh, well, I see physical distance. It's like you perceive physical distance, but we know that oxygen isn't empty space, that oxygen is in fact just energy moving. We know that all the oxygen permeates your body and my body, all the moisture in the air does the same. Everything is connecting everyone. We just perceive separation. And because we can perceive ourselves, we assume that self is separate from all the other selves. there's the paradox, right? But yeah, I really enjoy the whole, everything in your body perceives itself as separate, but you still call yourself you,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just a
Yeah.
perspective thing.
I saw your video recently that spoke on that, the idea that everything in the universe, we call it the universe, and everything, all the cells that make up Andrew's body, I label as Andrew, but it's still individual. And each of us, we label as individual, but it's still all the universe, like all of the cells of our body, except with the universe, we call it the universe. And with us, we label it separately.
Right, because we want control. We like the
Mm-hmm.
idea of control. And so we invest in the idea of division because it gives us the idea of control. As soon as we start realizing we're connected, all we have is influence. And that doesn't have the same egotistical payoff. You can't invest in influence because you have to be present for influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't amass an armada of influence. It has to be where you are right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can amass types of control, but they will eventually fail, or at least you will always become afraid that they will fail. So you're better off with influence, dance in the moment. That's where the tune is playing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. And so when you speak on death, do you fear death?
No,
Not at
no.
all.
And I know because I've been there often enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had more than a few times where I've died. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not something I'm afraid of. And mostly because I don't see myself as my character. I don't see myself as this body. I recognize that I'm working through this body and that this character is my experience. And I really enjoy that. But I'm well aware of the fact that everybody has awareness. Everything that is awareness. And that's all I am, is an expression of that. So
Mm-hmm.
when this character dies, it's just going to die. And what's funny about that, everybody's like, well, what happens after? It's like, there is no after. After is an illusion that's tied to the body, right? When this body dies, I'm still everybody. I'm still everybody everywhere, all the time, forever. I don't even notice this body die outside of the process of the illusion ending, right? And then I'm
Mm-hmm.
just back to being you. So when this body keels over, I'm going to be too busy being you to even notice, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like I can see myself having this conversation. So I'm just like, I'm understanding what you're saying for sure. And like trying to play devil's advocate a little bit. So with me versus, or Andrew, versus someone, in Germany right now, like that is me, but I am not aware of their immediate environment presently. I'm aware of Andrew and his environment presently, but I'm still them.
Yes. And admittedly, would you want that any other way? Because being you is a full-time job. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is a limitless universe of insight within your awareness alone, right? Let's focus
Mm-hmm.
on that. We keep
Yeah.
wanting to tie into the other people's narratives, and we do that sometimes. We like, and I've said this before, that people say telepathy is an extraordinary ability, but telepathy is what exists when we get out of the way. It's the norm. It's actually how we communicate, which is why somebody can say certain words to you that don't mean what somebody else may get out of that sentence, and you take it a totally different way. And it's because of the communication at the time. It's because of there's more communication happening under the words than we give credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Yeah,
telepathy is one of those things that we're like, oh, it's a superpower. It's like, no, it's just that we're so committed to this idea of division that we've covered it up with words and language because it gives us the ability to lie.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I guess I relates a little bit to, body language and just like every other way that we communicate besides language and words. And I've been thinking about that a little bit and trying to figure out a way to make a video expressing how your your thoughts can't be you, because there's, however many languages out there, and you've never thought a thought that's not a language you don't understand. And so how could it, because like the tree isn't the word tree, it's a tree. And yet the only word you would ever hear if you're thinking about it is tree in the language that you understand. And I'm like, I'm not close. I know when I'm close to getting close to like making a video, being able to express a concept like that. And I'm not there. And I usually just leave them be when I'm thinking about it. And eventually it comes. But yeah, it's that idea that you've never thought a thought in a language that you don't understand. So how could the thoughts be you besides the perception of, your conditioned experiences in that way.
Totally,
But
because you used to think before without language, right? We learned to think
Mhm,
without language. One of the most
mhm,
mind-blowing parts of after my daughter was born was I was watching her in the crib, and she was looking at her hand and she was trying to figure out how to move one digit at a time. And it just
mhm,
blew me away the amount of my own journey since going through that experience that I just take for granted. The fact that I was so raw to the world that I couldn't move my hands in a
mhm.
uniform way. Now
Yeah.
I'm in my 40s and I don't even remember having that memory. So we go
Mhm,
through so many stages of development, and
mhm,
it's so interesting. But originally, there's no concepts, there's no language. We learn that over time,
mhm.
right? So I
Definitely.
I, I love the fact that you're trying to circle around that, because I go through the same thing. I'll have an insight and I'll go, ooh, that'd be a good one to share. And I'll look at it and I'll go, yeah, it's still pretty messy. I'm just gonna leave that
Mhm,
in there for a bit. And then a couple of days later, maybe a week, it'll come back. It'll just pop into my head, but it will have polished up a bit. Right? It's
mhm,
distilled a little bit. And then even then sometimes it doesn't feel right. And so when it's meant to happen, it will. And
mhm,
that's more or less the way I think about it now. Because I used to, so when I had my YouTube channel back in 2005, I used to really beat myself up about not being able to deliver a clearer message. And then as I got better at delivering my message, I started getting people who were like, oh God, what is he going to say next? I got to follow him. And it made me super uncomfortable because it was still about me. And
mhm,
so I left social media videos as a whole for like 10 years. I just needed to get away and understand why I was doing what I was doing, and that I wasn't
mhm,
trying to get anywhere as a result. And that's
mhm,
what I enjoy about the TikToks I make now. I'm just throwing seeds. It's all I'm doing. And if
mhm.
somebody catches it, if somebody wants to use that seed and grow, cool, that's great. But I don't have any investment in the end result, because at the end of the day, everything's going to work out perfectly.
Definitely. Yeah, that's something I've been through a countless number of ups and downs since I really just started posting content really at all, besides having my own personal Instagram where I, post random pictures every couple months. Last July, I was basically sort of compelled to, it was some feeling inside of me. I made a video about it, but basically the way things started for me was I would go through every morning this process along with my meditation and my whole morning routine of imagining that I'm 100 years old, that I'm very old, and thinking about what I regret about my life, like really like spending a few minutes just like imagining being wrinkly, my heart's beating slower, I'm in a nursing home or whatever, and just thinking back, what do I regret about my life? And for over a year, maybe close to 2 years before I started posting content, the thing that came up was I regret not creating more content. And I did that literally every morning for a year and a half. And the reasons that I didn't was what I think the reason that a lot of people don't, like the fear of judgment, the fear of failure and whatnot. And finally got to a point last July and I was like, you know, fuck it.
Yep.
I gotta do it. And I
Yep.
made a YouTube video. The intro for it, I had some friends say like I need some more funny stuff in it. I made an intro. It was a skit from Dodgeball, posted that on TikTok. That
Nice.
went viral, and that was kind of it. But it started with that. And ever since there have been, what I started with was, it's been a lot of ups and downs, definitely. And trying to figure out, I'm very mathematically sort of driven. That's naturally how I grew up with school. That's what I did best in for the most part. So trying to figure out, formulas to posting and whatnot. And I sort of got into one last fall around Thanksgiving. I think I was around 40,000 followers then. And I made this commitment that I was going to post one video every day and go live for at least 10 minutes every day. And it worked great. I posted one every day basically from then until maybe the end of March. So a good amount of months. And um, I found that I got to a point that it was just a little bit too much. And I found that I wasn't doing it freely and enjoyably. It was
Yeah.
more so a chore. And
Discipline.
because I can be fairly disciplined, it was almost like I was letting myself down if I didn't post one, and I felt bad.
Yep.
As much as it helped, I think I grew to maybe 170,000 followers at that point. And I wasn't thinking about how many likes or views or whatever. So I sort of crossed that bridge because that's what I was focused on before. And then I crossed over on that. And it's like I had goals that weren't within my control. And then I shifted to goals within my control, posting consistently, going live. And then it got to a point that it was too much. I felt like I wasn't, I was talking about being present and I wasn't being present in my own life. I was focused on that. And so I took some time off. And when I came back, I just posted freely. And then things kind of took off after that. And now I'm in a better place of kind of like not worrying about, although it comes up sometimes, the likes and followers and whatnot, but also not being too rigid with myself and just allowing the video ideas to kind of happen fluidly and trusting that they will, even if it doesn't happen for a week in a row. That's right. That's okay.
That's funny. I just went through that phase in July. There was about a month there. I just didn't make any videos. And my daughter, who recognized that ever since she got me onto TikTok in December, I've been just kind of feeding in insights like a fiend. She's like, well, shouldn't you go and tell your followers? Shouldn't you keep up? And it's like, no, they have lives and they'll figure it out, right? Like I have other things to do, and then I don't feel bad about that because I'm not trying to claim to be a teacher, right? I'm just putting content out there that I'm enthusiastic about, that I'm thinking about myself. It's important to me. That's why I'm making it. I'm not making it for the sake of getting followers. I'm not making it for the sake of changing anybody's life, because I know I can't. That's the thing. I know I cannot change anybody. All I can do is give them the opportunity to change by not needing anything from them. And that's tricky. That took me a long time to get. And it really helped that I practiced it in life coaching for a number of years, because in a life coaching session, if I go in there with my baggage, if I'm trying to get anything out of the session, like, oh, I'm such a good life coach, blah, 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 it just goes to crap. It just doesn't work. It's all of a sudden it's about me. But if I go into a session and leave me at the door, so that way all I'm doing is sharing the space and allowing my awareness to respond accordingly as it feels is necessary, that person leaves feeling like they have changed rather than I changed them. And that sticks. That sticks way more than anything else, which is why I kind of cringe when I see spiritual teachers saying, like, just got to follow these 4 truths, or you just got to follow these 10 commandments. It's like, the more you make a structure, the harder it is for people to develop that sensitivity in the moment where they're relying on themselves. They're relying on their own awareness. They're always going to look back at, oh, is this compassionate? Is this, rule number 3 to mindfulness? And it's like, you're leaving mindfulness as a result of trying to be mindful. Right. So it's that paradoxical kick in the teeth again, where it's like, right, the best thing I can do is just be myself. That's hard to get, right? Because if you don't believe in yourself, you're like, well, certainly I have to package this up a bit. Certainly I have to, wrap it up in something pretty so it's easier for people to take. I've had so many people comment on my videos. You get more of a following if you had better lighting. You get more of a following if you put more production value. It's like, you obviously aren't getting why I'm doing this, right? Because it ain't that. I know I could put production value into videos. I don't know if you watched that 48-minute video I put on YouTube, Discover Transcendence. I created that like 2 years ago. It's massive, and it's all just stock photos and stock video clips and stuff with this nice background music. It looks solid. Like I was just bored, and I figured, well, why the hell not? So I wrote a script in about a month, and I just made this video. And so I know I can put more time into it, but like you were saying, it's like it almost gets to the point where it becomes a chore instead of just an expression of who I am. And I would prefer it to be the expression.
Definitely.
That's why I love your content. I've really enjoyed your content. It's funny, every once in a while I'll see a video of yours and I'll just run over to my wife like, you got to see this. Because we both recognize that fire. We both recognize when somebody has had that moment of clarity and it's driving them, because that's what it is. There are people who are seeking to feel better. And then there are people who realize that's not something that works. I can't just feel better. I have to be here, and that will start to feel free. But there is a distinct difference between people who are looking for comfort and people who are looking for clarity, and you can see it.
Yeah, and it's definitely something I go back and forth with, for sure. Like even getting to this point now, like, about a month ago when this clicked, and it's funny, like, that I've had an account that's, at first my account was not niche by any means. I was all over the place. And even now my YouTube account, like I'll post recipe videos, I'll post, fitness videos, I'll post vlogs, whatever. And I have some friends, giving me their insight, and they don't post content. So I'm like, I'll take it with a grain of salt. I'll listen to them for sure. I won't like be an asshole or anything, but I'll say like, and they'll be like, well, who are you trying to be? Are you trying to be, Greg Doucette, who's a YouTube fitness guy, or are you trying to be Eckhart Tolle? And I was like, I'm trying to be Andrew Renee, like, or yeah,
Absolutely.
in that way that it's like, if I niche down to a very specific thing, it takes the enjoyment out of it. These are my channels. They're labeled Andrew Renee, and I don't have, some other label or something even in my bio that's like fitness, food, vlogs, whatever, it's just like I've kept away from that. And because I think that if I did, it would take some of the joy out of it. And the idea that I have all of these platforms now that I'm able to share whatever I'm feeling and however I'm feeling, it's very freeing. And I understand that if I, niche down, maybe I'd be able to grow more quickly for the most part. People on, TikTok, they follow someone for a specific reason. It's not necessarily that they follow the person, they follow what they can get out of their content that helps them in a very specific way. And I don't think there's any really good reason to do that as it relates to my life and enjoyment and whatnot. And so I don't think I don't ever see myself doing that, but it's interesting, that it's kind of, there are a lot of people out there who think it would be a better idea for me to do that. It's like,
well, yeah, because it's like, why aren't you just following the formula? Look what everybody else is doing, and they're obviously successful. Look how happy they are. And that's it, is that when you start to gain awareness, you start embracing what I call nonlinear learning, where everything's a lesson, everything's an opportunity to have another insight, every experience you have. And I've done so many different jobs, from digging ditches to running a sign shop to pretty much everything. I've been everywhere. And in every one of those experiences, I changed. Every one of those experiences taught me something new about myself. And so now I'm older, and people who judged me back in my 20s, like, oh, look at the path you're taking now. How is this going to end up anywhere? And it's like, actually, I'm doing quite well. Years later, I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but it did. It did turn out. It turned out in the way that was an expression of me, because I didn't just try to copy someone else. And so now I have my life, which is what makes me happy. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's the whole point, is that you can try and copy other people. You can try and live up to what other people say makes them happy. But it's important to remember that our perspective of somebody saying they're happy isn't proof that they're happy, right? Everybody, regardless of how rich or poor we are, ends up sitting on the toilet in the middle of the night, doubting their choices. Mm-hmm. Everyone has that experience at some point of being alone and in doubt. So there is no difference in our potential according to how much money we have or what we do. It's really about what we do with our moments. Mm-hmm. And that's why I love your content, is because you are all over the place, but it's all an expression of you.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that was one of the things that I decided early on. And there's been some people that I've followed for years that have kind of talked about this idea of, staying true to yourself and being true to yourself. And I've talked about it. And it was something early on that I committed to fully, because it doesn't make any sense. And I've talked to some friends who post content too, and they're like, oh, I want to get into YouTube, but I don't know if people are going to resonate. Like, I feel like I have to be more expressive and whatnot. And I'm like, so let's go through that scenario. You start by being more expressive. You build a couple thousand subscribers, and then you continue being expressive, and things are going pretty well. They're really enjoying how expressive you are all the time. Mm-hmm. They love that you're expressive in all of your videos. And then it gets to a point, maybe you get 10,000, maybe you get up to 100,000 followers, and you grow this crazy page. And all of a sudden, all of these people are following this idea of you that you're not, and eventually you break. And I think that's what so many people dealing with things like depression and anxiety deal with, is that they have been wearing this mask their entire lives, trying to be something for the world and for others. And truly the best way to, avoid that and be able to exist in this world without as many of those feelings is to be yourself fully, truly, all the time and everywhere, because you can do no wrong. You're worried about your performance on whatever, in sports, on a podcast, on Zoom call like this, and it's like you're worried about messing up or whatever. And it's like, if you're truly yourself, even if you stumble on your words or forget what you're saying, it's like, if you're truly being yourself, like, there is no messing up. You can do no wrong. So someone saying like, oh, I should be more expressive because I'm making a YouTube page, it's like, I don't think that's what you want to do.
That's right. That's exactly it. Absolutely. Well, people tend to comment like, oh, you're so eloquent. It's like, no, I've just screwed up what I'm saying so many times that I'm well versed with how I do that. Like, I'm an expert in screwing up, which is how I can avoid screwing up. But I had to accept, yeah, occasionally I'm wearing the smart ass hat and occasionally I'm wearing the dumbass hat. And that's okay. Like, there is nothing wrong with making a mistake. There's nothing wrong with stumbling if it teaches you how to walk better. Right.
Exactly. And I think becoming something that, because I still even, less so now through just experiencing more, situations like this, speaking with you, but even like I'll be the guest on a podcast and I'll get like a little bit nervous before. And it's this idea of becoming comfortable with not knowing and just becoming comfortable with not having the answer and being okay with not doing great. And people will say that to me too, like, you're so well spoken. And it's like, I spent years being afraid of public speaking and speaking in situations like this. And I just got to a point that I became okay with being scared of it and choosing to do it and not letting my feelings and emotions dictate my actions, and doing it anyway and doing it anyway and doing it anyway and doing it anyway, to the point that now it's like, it's become this background sort of hum. And now I have the experiences of doing it, going live on TikTok, probably thousands of times, being the guest on, 10, 12 podcasts now, having my own podcast. And it's like, it's just through the experience, but it's not that I don't feel those things ever anymore. I still do, for sure, but I don't let them dictate. And I know that it's okay. It's part of, the human experience, part of the, illusion of separateness that we decided to do is these feelings.
Absolutely. And it comes back down to just responsibility for that, right? Clarity. It's just, okay, this is where I am. This is what I'm doing right now. And this is what I'm going to be in. But when we try to dodge that, when we try to get an idea of what's happening, we immediately falter. But what's interesting is that you were saying that the more we do it, the easier it gets. And that's true, because every time we make a leap of faith and we roll with it, no matter how badly we might roll with it, it reinforces the idea, oh, I can do that. That's something I can do. Whether I did it well or not, I'm still here. And to me, that's the bar. I'm still here. I'm a success. That's as far as it goes with me, right?
Yeah.
I'm still here, which means anything's possible from here on. But it's true. Often we'll look at people who do have this skill down, the skill of insight, or the skill to just swallow their fear and continue on despite. It's like that expression that courage is not the absence of fear, it's continuing on despite it, right? But we'll see that and then we'll go, oh, well, that must be easy for them. It's like, nope, it's not. They've just had more practice. My wife will say that to me every once in a while. It's like, well, it must be easy for you to ignore people's judgment. It's like, no, it's just I've done it so many times that it's almost reflexive. Right. It's just like that now, where for years it was reminding myself they don't see me, or reminding myself they don't know me, or reminding myself, oh, I actually don't know what they're thinking either. And it's always just deprogramming this sense of certainty. Right. But it's over years and years and years. It's like every insight is a skill. I always say this, but insight is like an infinite onion. Every time you have an insight, there's another layer that's right after it, and you'll be back to it soon. So just wait.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's been times when you said just like doing it over and over with, dealing with judgment, and both of us being on social media, it's flooded with that. And I've had times even, it's been kind of an interesting experience, because like I'll respond to some comments. I've gotten much better about just leaving them and not giving them the energy, as difficult as that can be sometimes. And I'll have someone who it's seemingly a sarcastic or negative comment, and I'll respond, not in a hateful way, just respond. And they'll say something. Sometimes it'll be like, oh my gosh, I didn't think you would respond. I love your content, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why are you posting this? Or they'll say, I didn't actually mean any hate by that. Like, I meant this, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think it came off the wrong way. And it's interesting how many times that's happened. And it's just been kind of funny realizing that and seeing that.
For sure. Well, and especially, and that's the practice. That's one of the reasons that I do like TikTok, because I avoided TikTok forever. It was my daughter who finally bugged me into joining. And then I started getting into conversations. And what I enjoy is when people leave a comment like, your host. Perfect example. So I used to run live seminars, and I would do seminars on life or death or spirituality or dealing with anxiety, blah, blah, blah. And I did this one seminar on the afterlife, death, and that whole thing. And this guy shows up, and about halfway through the seminar, after there's 12, 15 people sitting there, halfway through, he raises his hand. He's like, I just want to say, I think you're completely full of shit. Right in the middle of the room with everybody else sitting there, right? And what's interesting, I had a few clients that were there, and they just like lean forward to watch, like, oh, what's Ray going to do with this? Right. And I was just like, well, that's really interesting. I don't mind. What do you mean? And we just started talking about it. And by the end of it, he just started spinning his wheels. He didn't know what to say because he just wanted to define himself by opposition. It wasn't that he had any actual beef with what I was saying so much as it just wasn't what he wanted to believe about himself. And so eventually it got to the point where everybody recognized, okay, so this really isn't an opening into a conversation. You're not trying to perpetuate this. You're actually just making a definitive stance for the sake of self-validation. That's all you're doing, right? And so that practice on TikTok is super useful. Being able to take a comment, sit in it, go, it's not about me. Don't make it about me. And then address the comment for where it's coming from, to address the comment from its intention, from the point of clarity or confusion that it comes from, without it being about me. I'm not trying to be right. I'm just saying that why are we settling on an answer just for the sake of comfort? Right. And that's not the same as being right. I just want to keep talking.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Yeah. I've toyed with that idea, and especially, with content and with putting ourselves out there of the judgment side of things, and understanding that it really doesn't have anything to do with you. People are using you as a, vehicle or reflection of themselves to post. And I posted a video a couple of weeks ago related to this, talking about the difference between someone complimenting you and someone insulting you. And when someone compliments you and they're very, like clearly in a good mood, we're like, wow, they're a really nice person. They're like super happy. They're giving out compliments left and right. And then it's like, the person who insults you, you're like, oh my gosh, I must have something wrong with me. And you put it on yourself versus putting it on them, instead of being like, oh, they're probably really unhappy right now, in a dark place, et cetera, et cetera. And like just the difference between those two things, and how with the negative, and same with, dwelling on things. Something amazing happens. It's awesome. We experience it and we move on pretty quickly. Something, negative, bad, horrible, whatever
that's our week
happens. And there you go.
Yeah, that's the whole week. I'm going to think about this until the weekend, and then find a way to let it go. Right. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Religion's the same way. Something good happens to us, it's God's grace. Something bad happens to us, we're a sinner. Right. It's the exact same way. And these conversations, and I just want to say this because I know we're going to wrap up there shortly, but I wanted to say that these conversations are so important. They're so important because we're not trying to get anywhere with this conversation. You and I are not having this conversation thinking, oh, wow, this is going to make us so famous because we're talking about things that nobody wants to talk about. We're having this conversation for the rare person who is watching this, digging into it for their own reasons. We're having this conversation because there are reflections of us, like us, that didn't have exposure to the influences that we had that got us to where we are. Like, I throw out seeds because when I was lost in hell, I didn't see any way out. There was nobody there. There was none of this content. Like the Celestine prophecy and Eckhart Tolle and all this other stuff didn't come out until after I got out of hell. So when I was in hell, I didn't recognize any of the things I was seeing as clear pointers out of that hell. All I had was Catholicism. All I had was religion and maybe some philosophy, but a bunch of people around me who didn't understand any of that. So putting this content out there for the sake of it, for just saying, I'm going through this. This is what I've come up with. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
that's huge. It's perpetuating a discussion for the discussion's point.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, yeah, from my experience, I really do share things. My whole idea with all of my content has just been sharing things that have helped me and helped me deal with anxiety, fear, worry, all of the emotions. And that's it. I'm not doing it necessarily, although sometimes I'll say like, yeah, I just enjoy helping people. Like I'm not really doing it to help people. I'm simply sharing things that have helped me, that currently help me. And part of the reason, like, as much as I would love to, be fully enlightened and whatnot, I do actually, a side of me is grateful that I still, get nervous and worry about things and, have a degree of fear of death, though it's probably gotten a lot better because I'm able to use those experiences, figure out things to help. Because whenever I've gone through something difficult, like I'm always like, on YouTube, reading books, like how to work through it and trying to figure it out basically as quickly as soon as I can. And so being able to go through those experiences personally and then come out the other side, and then now having platforms to share that. And that's basically it. And a lot of what I've done recently, the past couple months, past month or two, especially with, this realization of, non-duality and whatnot, like really, really allowing it to click, sharing that. But even before that, I had a week that I was like sort of in a sort of hell in my mind, intrusive thoughts. And as much as I knew that it wasn't me, I was aware of them, I was still very much identified with Andrew, and all the thoughts had to do with him and him, losing things in the eyes of the world. And although I wasn't necessarily taking it seriously, it was still there constantly. And it was because I was identified with him. And so I was sharing that I was going through having a shitty week and I was struggling. And then when it clicked, I was like, sharing that sort of experience. And I'm sure someone who, maybe follows me closely probably saw that progression. And then since then, it's been kind of very much just, I don't know, freeing. I've felt lighter for sure.
I think so I would say that your content is vastly more helpful than a lot of the content that exists out there, which is just regurgitating practiced insights or practiced steps, because it's so easy to read a book by somebody else and go, oh, okay, I'm just going to follow these steps. But that person went through things they're not communicating in that book. That person is communicating, or that person is talking about insights that were derived from their day-to-day life. And we don't get that perspective. We see them as the spiritual guru, but they had a path to get there. Right. And it's the communication of that path that helps more than anything else, because now we're not tossing it out as a polished spiritual insight that's immediately going to get you to enlighten. We're saying this is going to help you crawl up that muddy hill a little bit faster. This is going to help you gain a little bit more traction, as opposed to this is going to solve the problem. It's like, no, this is something that helped me. This is something that's genuinely from my life. It's not something I've been told is the truth. This is something I've seen work. And that's where I try and do all of my content from. And I see the same in you, because that's the only stuff that's real. Everything else becomes conceptual garbage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I've had situations where someone's asked me, like a mother recently divorced has asked me, just went through a divorce. And I've said, as much as I want to help you, I do not feel like I'm in a place. I've never been through a divorce. I've never had kids. I've never, how could I speak on that? And it's just like, it would simply be regurgitating things. And to a degree, when I'm struggling with something, I will, I've read a lot of books. I've listened to a lot of things. And so I do use a lot of the concepts that I've learned in my videos, but it's always related to me. So I'm speaking from it, like, into my existence and through my understanding of it and how it's helped me. And I couldn't even fathom necessarily posting something, just like going through a random book and like finding the key pieces and just making a video about it. I've never really thought about it like that.
Well, that's hugely telling. Like that's so indicative of who you are as a person, because that's exactly what a lot of people want to do when they're going through hell, and they find something that makes them feel better, and more importantly, reinforces their ego. It says, oh, you understand something that other people don't now. And so you almost want to go out, hold it up and say, look, this gives me value. And the whole time it's like, actually, you're perpetuating the illusion. There's this one TikTok creator. I'm so impressed with this girl. A couple months ago, I think it was 3 or 4 months ago, I left a comment on her TikTok video, and she was talking about the Palladians and you know, star seeds and the aliens talking to us, and this intergalactic war between heaven and hell, and all this big advanced narrative. And so me being who I am, I'm just like, well, that's cute. You know, let's talk about that a bit, right? And so we ended up in this very long conversation. It went on for a good couple of hours, just back and forth through direct messaging. We stopped talking. You know, she admitted, like, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying, but if I stop talking about this stuff, I'm going to lose all my followers. And then I went, okay, well, that's up to you. Several months later, all of a sudden I run across a video where she's saying, I was so lost in myself that I was manipulating people into believing something that wasn't real, because I needed to believe it myself. And it was so inspiring to see this person just have that moment of insight. And it's great, but this is why it's important to speak up. This is why it's important to challenge people, because if we're always, it's like that expression, oh, we don't talk about religion and politics in pleasant company. It's like, well, that's the best way to not grow. Right? Like, we're going to talk about two things that are instrumental to our existence. We're not going to talk about two things that are instrumental to our existence because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? We need to talk about these things. Otherwise, we're not going to grow. And we need to address people who are participating in the illusion without recognizing that they are. And it's not out of judgment. It's not out of distaste. It's honestly out of empathy. It's like, I know what it's like to be that lost and convince yourself you're not.
Definitely. So that girl that you commented on, was she just like reading about things and making up sort of stories, or
she was following other TikTok creators who were making up stories. She was following very convincing confidence salesmen, right? They were basically saying, like, oh no, I know this, I've experienced it, this is what I saw, source told me this, and messengers and all of that. And they're very convincing, especially when you want to believe it. When you want to believe it, you will. And it isn't until you start realizing that, oh, I'm believing this for a reason. One thing I love to do is taking something that's egotistical, like the concept of a starseed, and then pushing through it and going, why settle on starseed? Right? Like, why limit yourself? And the immediate thought is, what do you mean? I'm saying I'm an intergalactic being. It's like, is that all? Right? Like, let's talk about this. And so you're almost using the ego to defeat the ego. You're saying, like, you can have all the power and influence and freedom you want. You just have to abandon yourself. Right?
Yeah. Those concepts like star seeds and all of that, I have not dabbled in any of that whatsoever. It's never really resonated with me in a way that seems helpful necessarily. And I've just started getting into a little bit of like Dolores Cannon type things. I don't know what your stance on her is, but it's not no.
I avoid channelers, and I avoid channelers because
what do you mean by
channelers? People who are channeling other beings, people who are talking through entities that are out in the universe. Dolores Cannon, she did a lot of past life regression with her clients. She did a lot of talking to external supernatural beings through her clients, and so she developed a lot of the narratives that she peddled as a result. The only problem that I have with that is that if you look at Dolores Cannon specifically, if you look at her history, she always ended up finding just another insight that led to the next book, which led to the next seminars, which led to the next profitable package. And it was always just more narrative. It was always more the illusion of control. It's like, you signed a contract before you came here saying everything that's going to happen in your life. And it's like, no, not quite. Right? Or, after you die, you're going to get to choose which life you're going to go to. It's no, not quite. This is all reinforcing identity and control. This is all reinforcing the fact that you can have what you want, instead of letting go of what you want gives you everything you need. And so there's a problem with channelers in the fact that because they're not saying I'm the source of my insight, their message is irresponsible. That's the problem. That's the only problem I ever have with it, is the fact that because it's not coming from them, they're not telling their followers that it can come from them.
Interesting. So they're almost like withholding the power to a degree. And it seems like with her, because my thing is like, I'll get very passionate about things very quickly and easily, and sort of like assume like, oh, that sort of makes sense. Oh, that sort of makes sense. And I kind of like, I find myself bouncing around, and like sort of changing my viewpoint on things, not like every day necessarily, but just for an example, like I was super into like intermittent fasting way of eating, and like one meal a day, and thinking like that's the way, because there were a lot of, doctors, not quote unquote doctors, like legitimate doctors, who pushed that. And then I realized like, they were kind of pushing an idea that isn't necessarily the truth, the full truth. And it's like they were sort of making money off that, but because they were doctors, like it's hard to sift through everything. And so for me, like, with Dolores Cannon, her idea on death, and this idea that, we just chose all of our struggles before we lived, or like, oh, that
sounds nice.
Right? So
that
like
nice.
I kind of like, initially I can be very skeptical with certain things, but then some things I'm less so. Like I'm not usually like, I'm sort of in the middle, in that like I know that I don't know. I don't know anything for sure. I'm not sure of anything I talk about, and I try to stick to that above all. But it'll be like, oh, like I don't know about that, or like, oh, that seems great, and
that's honest. That's honest. I mean, that's the whole thing, is that at least you're saying, I'm not sure. Right. And when I talk about things, it's what I've seen, but I'm always saying, outside of the present moment, nothing I'm saying is real. Like it's always about what's here and now. But it's always easy to want to follow somebody who says, I have an answer, because we have so many questions. And the understanding that our best self is when we exist without the need for an answer. That's a tough one. That's really hard. And it violates what every spiritual teacher has been apparently saying to us, which is, follow me. And which is often not what they're saying. I mean, like Buddha would say, find your Buddha nature. Well, for you, that would be your Andrew nature, right? Like that was the whole thing. For me, it's my Ray nature. And that like we mistranslate all of this, right? It's like Jesus was saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, it seems pretty straightforward, unless you think you're an ego, in which case you think your neighbor is separate from you. But he's literally saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Right? Right. So the answer is right there, but it's never reinforcing identity and control. That's the one thing I always watch for with any message, is if it's trying to make me feel better, I am immediately skeptical. Right? Because awareness doesn't feel better. There's no safety in awareness at all. There's just faith in yourself.
Yeah. A video you had recently, a message like, you are not here and now, you are here and you are now. That resonated with me a lot. And this idea, when people, and I think, with Jesus's teachings, people have like literalized it and like humanized these ideas of God and whatnot. And this idea, and it's like, it almost frustrates me, but I know that it shouldn't, like that he had these thoughts, things that we've talked about on this video, and that you talk about all the time and have been talking about for so long. And it's like everything in the last 2,000 years, like that's what's come of him. It's like,
yes and no, right? Because I mean, I grew up Catholic, and admittedly that destroyed a good portion of my life. But ever since waking up, I look back at Jesus as an example. And there are some serious lessons there. There are things that I can learn from the insights that he shared. So it wasn't all negativity. What I always get a kick out of is the fact that he knew people were going to run with this in the wrong direction. That's why whenever he gave a parable, he would always say, let he who has ears to hear, hear. It's like, I know some of you aren't getting this. I know some of you are taking this the exact wrong way, but some of you have ears to hear. And I'm talking for you. I love that part of the story. The fact that he knew not everybody was going to get this. Like even Krishnamurti, by the time Krishnamurti died, somebody asked him, like, how many people do you think you've affected, truthfully? And he's like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10. And he died in his 90s.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to be in it for the long haul, right?
Mhm.
And that it helps to know that we don't die. Somebody asked, like, why do you make all these videos? Why do you spend so much time doing this? And it's like, well, why not? Right? It's because I can. That's why. Because I can,
Yeah.
and I have eternity. So buckle up, because I'm going to be
Mhm.
doing a lot more.
Mhm. Yeah,
Why not?
definitely. Yeah. And with a teacher like Jesus, I find a lot of his teachings extremely beneficial and helpful. And I think I was more so just saying with religion, and he's sort of been, worshipped as higher. And like, I don't think that's what he would have wanted in any means. And I did a Q&A on Instagram yesterday, and someone asked if I'd ever think about starting a cult. They're looking for one. And I made a joke that, I used to be in one, got out of it. It was called Catholicism,
Nice.
and blah, blah, blah. And, I or like after that said, I'm not anti-religion. If religion, makes you happy, helps you be a good person, it has some guiding principles that can be beneficial. But at the same time, if you are like, try to stop telling people they need Jesus, and
Right.
realize, like, hot take, I don't think Jesus wanted to be worshiped.
Oh.
And it's just interesting after everything that he did, that, like, there was this church and worshipers, and it's becomes like such a massive part of our earth that
Huge.
it's, I don't
It's
know.
such a
It's
dominant
very
part of the
interesting.
narrative. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's why it's worth looking at, is because it is such an interesting part, or a dominant part of our narrative. There's so much of our reality that's formed around that narrative that there have to be some insights. But see, because I grew up, and I started most of my awakening process through working through religion, through working through these conversations.
Mhm.
I have no problems saying to religious people that if you're holding on to your religion, you're stopping your own growth. That if you're believing in a God, you've missed God entirely, and that Jesus did not see God the same way that you do, which makes it impossible for you to recognize the experience. I have no problem saying that to religious
Yeah.
people, because I know it. I know it
Mhm.
through and through. And they'll say, well, you can't justify, you can't classify everybody. It's like, if you are conceptualizing God, you're not experiencing it. That's it. There's no other way around that. Any God you can believe in isn't God. Right? And they hate that point, especially when they say, well, no, got to follow through Jesus Christ. It's like, I understand what you're saying, but you're saying it because you've never actually experienced God. You're telling me to follow somebody that you follow, when I'm saying I don't need to. God's right here.
Mhm.
Right? Where are you going?
Yeah. So do you believe that God is the present? God is being itself
Well,
in
that's
that
what
way,
I really
or
like, the
is
question,
it?
is there a God? And the answer, who's asking?
Mhm. Yeah.
Right? Because
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
point. God is what is. It's not an
Mhm.
entity that's separate. It's not something that we pray to. It's not something that we ask anything of. It's just what we are. God is what is. God is the
Mhm.
universe in action. And we tend to take the expression God and go, oh, it's a person. It's an individual being. It's like, no, it's just a concept for who you are on your most limitless level. And
Mhm.
because when we think of that concept from a limited state of mind, we can't accept that. We can't
Mhm.
even contemplate or entertain the idea that we could be caught in God, because immediately it becomes an ego trip. And you'll hear that when you say, like, I am God's awareness, they'll go, oh, you think everything revolves around you. It's like, yes and no. Like, it's a
Mhm.
more complicated conversation than that. It's not just,
Yeah.
I am God, I rule supreme. But I always find it very telling that any hierarchical mind, any mind that is egotistical, will look at God as being higher in the hierarchy, as opposed to
Mhm.
being God being the great equalizer that is everybody.
Yeah. Like the higher being. And another question I get, I don't mean to keep you on here
No,
too long, but another question I get with there being a higher power, and people like, oh, I don't necessarily believe in God, but I believe in a higher power, and a creator. If there is no creator, then how did this all happen? And earlier you said, like, this is what has always been. It has always been, and it will always be. It is existence. And so I don't know if this is like beyond our dimension almost, or what, but the idea that, like, how could there all of this be without a creator? And
So I made a
where did it
video
come
about
from?
this. That's a great point. And so the Christian argument is typically, if you see a building, that implies that there was a creator, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the argument is, or at least my argument is true, unless you see the building itself, right? And that's the thing. Like, we think creator and created, which are dualistic concepts. There's a separation there, right? And in the same as the observer and the observed. And they're just dualistic illusions. We're trying once again to describe something that's unitary. There is no creator separate from the created, because the creator is the created, right? There's nothing but what is. And so it's very hard to picture that, because it's like, well, God's creating the universe. It's like, yeah, you're right. Here I am doing it. Each and every one of us are doing it. We're all instruments of change. We're all instruments of influence. Every moment adapts according to all of our collective ripples. So we are God. We are the creator and the creation in one, because neither one apply, right? The beginning and the end is now.
Yeah. Is that like the idea of the eternal now?
That's all that is. That's all that is, right? No matter when it is, it's now. No matter when it is. And you can't ever get out of that, because that's true for everything. Right? That's why I always find it funny when people say, I'm having problems being present. It's like, actually, you're not. You're always present. You can't really help it. You're just denying it, avoiding it, thinking about it, analyzing it. You're doing everything except being in it, but it's what is, right? So, and that's why surrender is such a big part of this journey that we call spiritual, because you're just surrendering to reality. You're surrendering the need to think about reality, and you're just accepting that you're a part of it. And we make that into big metaphysical concepts like faith and humility and following God and all that, but really it's just being real. It's just being who you are without analyzing that and compartmentalizing that and categorizing that. And nothing really changes in our day-to-day life. That's what's interesting, is that people are like, well, how will life change if I'm enlightened? It doesn't, outside of the fact that you just don't think about things as much. It's like there was a Zen master who was asked, how has life changed since you achieved enlightenment? And he's like, when I wake up, I wake up. When I do the dishes, I do the dishes. When I sleep, I dream. That was it. It's just, there's no inner dialogue. Nothing else has changed. The why I do things has changed, but the doing things has not.
Yeah, I've toyed with ideas, and recently, especially, I've been sort of in and out of that experience of, being aware, just like aware of if I get an internal dialogue, just very much being aware of it and disidentified from it and my emotions as well. And I've toyed with, videos talking about like, what would be the difference if this was a video game and everything was the same, but this was a video game, or, a simulation or whatever. And I feel like the difference would be the internal dialogue. Yep. Like you wouldn't have that. It would just be, everything was exactly the same. Like, what else is there? Like, oh, why don't I just, kill someone? And it's like, well, if you want to spend the video game in jail, like,
or dealing with that guilt,
but you're going to still deal with that. Or like, why don't I just kill myself? It's like, if you want to stop playing, like, it doesn't really change no matter which way you put it. And it's like, why can't I fly? And it's like, well, maybe this video game, you can't fly, like, why does it, all of these questions are like, I think really the only difference is that you have less of a association and identification with your body and mind and ego. And I've tried to express that in different ways through that sort of like, what if this is just a video game? Like, what would really change? And I think that's the main thing. And it helps me. That's the reason I post, is because I think like that sometimes. And I'm like, what if this is, what is the difference really? And I don't find many besides that.
It's the overcommitment, right? It's how seriously we take it. And that's the only thing I always say about ego. It's like, you're not trying to kill your ego. You're trying to understand it. You're trying to stop taking it as truth. That's it. Once you see through it, you can use it, you can play with it, you can have fun with it, you can laugh at it, you can do whatever you want. But as soon as it's the truth, now you're in trouble. Right? And then that's the whole thing. And so if you've never seen it, watch, there was a stand-up comedy skit with Bill Hicks. I don't know if you've ever seen Bill Hicks, But
I don't
just
think
look
so.
up on YouTube, look up Bill Hicks, It's Just a Ride. It was the last bit of one of his stand-up comedy specials, and he talks very much about the fact it's just a ride, right? And we take it very seriously. And it's exactly in line with what you're saying. You're going to love it. He was so ahead of his time. The man was brilliant. It was really good. So
yeah.
and I will leave you on that note. We'll wrap up here in a few minutes. Is there anything else you would like to cover? And I do hope we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, I would love to do this again. I've really enjoyed this. Yeah, I mean, I had some questions written down. I think we pretty much covered a lot of what I was hoping we would talk about. Yeah, I'm going through. I had like 7 questions written down. I guess one is the difference between, personal responsibility and societal or, planetary responsibility, like and social responsibility of helping others versus helping yourself. And a lot of people I'll post a video, and I tend to lean towards personal responsibility. And I think a lot of times thinking that, you can impact the world is like, are you impacting it as, this ego wanting to build itself up as an impactful ego, or are you actually trying to help? And I, from my experience and what I try to do is impact those closer to me, like your circle, and then maybe expand from there, rather than trying to save the entire planet at once. It's like try to save your community in that way and work from there. But people will get angry about things like that. Like, we need to save the planet is dying, and do all these things. And it's like, what is the true impact of that actually, if you're a celebrity flying a private jet to go speak about saving the planet,
That's right. Or if you're judging everybody who doesn't agree with you and causing more division as a result, how does that change anything? Right. And that's the thing, is that we can try to force people to change, but that doesn't work. I mean, this is why eventually compassion will eventually become fascism long enough. Because, even Hitler was against animal cruelty, for example, right? Like, so just because we want to create a positive change doesn't necessarily mean we're coming from a positive place. And so your strategy of dealing with how you respond, because to me, responsibility is that it's how we respond to each and every moment. So if I'm responding out of a mentality that's divisive or lost in illusion, then I'm going to create distortion. I'm going to create more division in all of the ripples that I create. But if I can take responsibility for that response and find insights that bring me back to my authenticity, then I'm always perpetuating that authenticity, that unity, that compassion, that empathy that is a result of being in that state in every conversation I have. And it's not through deliberately trying to do so. It's just because that's who I am. And it has that impact as a result. But that is the only organic way that change really does happen, because you can, pick up a picket sign, go down to a riot and say, I'm against this, and not change yourself at all. So then you go back into the world and you continue to perpetuate the mentality that caused that problem to begin with, because we are the world, right? What we think individually is what is expressed collectively. We are the world. And as we change individually, we change each other individually, and the world changes accordingly. But we always want to take the Band-Aid approach. We always want to go, oh, that's a problem, let's just fix that. It's like, no, that problem manifested because of the toxicity at the root of this system. And that toxicity comes from our mentality. So to try and put a Band-Aid on it is more or less an avoidance of trying to change yourself. It's so easy to get into groups and say, oh, you've all got to change the world, but I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to continue thinking what I'm thinking. It's like, that's not how this works. It's comfortable. It's a good way of pointing the finger, but it's not going to change a thing.
Distraction from, definitely.
Right. And that's a tough one for people to take. And Krishnamurti was really good for that. I don't know if you've read any Krishnamurti, but if you get a chance, do.
I will.
Yeah, he's pretty intense. It's a tough read, though. It's he's pretty razor's edge. He was hard to take towards the end of his life. A lot of people just avoided it because he doesn't give you anything to settle on. He doesn't give you any certainty. He's like, why do you need it? Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
It's such a good dialogue. You'll really enjoy it, especially if you like Alan Watts. But Krishnamurti doesn't have the humor that Watts did. He was
Hmm.
way more serious. So if you want a good
Okay.
laugh, go back to
Hmm.
Watts.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say it sounds a lot like Alan Watts there with those that sort of dialogue, and he talks a lot about that with Buddhism, that it's essentially just a dialogue back and forth and coming to it. And I guess that points back to what you were kind of been saying this whole time, that it's about yourself and figuring out for yourself that there isn't anyone there to give you the answer. It's finding it within you, and there are pointers and there are conversations, and there are people out there trying to help point to it, but at the end of the day, it seems like there aren't as many answers as we would like.
That's right. None that will help us as much as we'd like them to.
Hmm.
Right. And that's it. Is it
Definitely.
accepting, right? All I can do is keep going.
Hmm.
That's it. And if once you get that and you stop judging your progress, then you start to find your stride, right? In Kung Fu, I used to teach Wing Chun, and I used to always tell my students, don't judge your progress, because they would always come up to me and go, I don't feel like I'm making any advancements. I don't feel like I'm getting better at this. But because I've been doing it for 10 years, I could see what they're doing and I could see the improvements. They can't, because they don't have the context yet. And the
Definitely.
same is true with life, right? We
Hmm.
don't have the context. It's the same with squirrels, right? I'm just going to throw this in there to wrap up the video. Squirrels lose like half their nuts that they collect. And
Hmm.
they're very frustrated by that. They don't understand why that happens to them. And yet that's how forests get planted. So there's a
Hmm.
bigger picture happening. And I mean, what
Hmm.
are we if not squirrels frustrated about losing our nuts from time to time, right?
I love that analogy so much. Yeah, that's awesome.